Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first day of the Business of Biochar. I'm going to just share a slideshow here just to get us started. And I'm going to start here with just taking us through how the heck do you use this platform. I know that it's a little bit of a learning curve at first, but I promise by the end of today, you'll have it mastered and it's a lot of fun once you do learn it. So let's start with what we're in right now, which is presentation mode. You'll see on the right-hand side, there's different ways that you can interact with our speakers as well as your fellow attendees. So we have the chat, and it probably is going to open in your general chat where you've seen I've put a lot of information just today, especially answering Brenton's question. That general chat goes to every person that's in the event. So a great way to just have conversation about what you're hearing in our presentations today. If you click the left-hand arrow out of that general chat, you'll see a few different other types of chat. So there's a table chat, which will have the table number of whichever table you were just sitting at. So if you were having a great conversation on our networking floor, you can continue that through the chat feature here and continue that group conversation. And then you'll also see our private chat just below that. And that's any individual that's in the event. You can send them a direct message. So that's another way to network. My name's Caroline Pete. Please send me a message if you are having technical difficulties at any time, because I am the best person to help you through those. You'll also see another tab, which is participants. Participants will tell you who is on at this moment. And then the Q&A is where you're going to want to definitely get involved. So the Q&A is you ask your question. You can ask questions anonymously. And then what you can also do is upvote questions. And as you upvote those questions, they will rise to the top. And our moderators have all been instructed to start at the top when they're answering the questions and work their way down. So if you see a question you like, make sure to upvote it. And then just a little bit on the networking floor. You just have to double click to move from table to table. Each table acts as its own conversation. And then we do have multiple floors. I put in a little more information in that general chat. And if you have any other questions while you're on the networking floor, please don't hesitate to ask me in the chat. I would like to give a huge thank you to our sponsors who have made this event possible. So we have Waka Foundation, who has been a big supporter of IBI, our gold sponsor for this event. We also have our silver sponsors, which is Vow, I believe it's pronounced, and Pyreg. They both have tables on the networking floor. You can actually click on their sponsor banners, and they actually have pop-up media, which is really cool. So go ahead and check that out when we are in the networking mode, and I'll give you reminders. And if you want to speak to any of the representatives that are in the event, the best place to find them is on floor 1 at their table. And then we have a lot of bronze sponsors as well who have contributed funds to this event: Restoration Fuels, Glenaris, Clean Air, Safe Forest, which is the Devonshire Group, Metzler Forest Products, Quantum Loophole, Bioforce Tech Corporation, Long Island Energy, Biomass Controls, and TerraChar. So thank you so much to all of our sponsors for making this event possible. With that, I'm going to invite up really honestly, one of the people who truly put this entire event together, Kathleen Draper with IBI. She is IBI's chair, and she has put together most of the content for today's event. So we owe a lot to Kathleen for this event, and she's going to give you a little rundown on IBI. So Kathleen, you have the floor.
Thanks, Caroline. But I would like to say that for the past 2 days, I've been saying to Caroline, I'm glad I'm not her, because as many emails as I'm getting, she's getting about 5 times that many. So thank you all. Just a very brief word about IBI. We are the only international nonprofit focusing right now on fostering stakeholder collaboration and good industry practices within the biochar community. And today we're here in collaboration with the USBI, which Tom Miles is the executive director of. So I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you all for coming. As you may know, U.S. Biochar Initiative is a nonprofit association of scientists and engineers and farmers dedicated to the promotion and use of biochar, which are safe, stable, and sustainable. And we promote biochar through networking, education, demonstration. We've been looking forward to this particular event for some time, and we've really gotten to a point with biochar internationally where it's becoming a real business. So with that, let's carry on with the program.
Thank you, Tom. I just want to go over the schedule for today. This schedule will be put in the chat in just a little bit. It is on the IBI website. You can see the schedule for each day of our event. For today, we're doing our welcome right now. Then we're going to go into scaling biochar, inviting Kathleen and Tom and also Rob back up. Then we're going to immediately go into our next session, academic progress and future research needs. After that, we'll be taking a networking break. So back to that networking floor, get you a little bit more used to it. You'll be able to start having those conversations and continuing those conversations from earlier. And then we're going to come back for at 1:30 Eastern. These are all Eastern times. Sorry about that. I'll probably make that a little bit more obvious for our international friends on later dates, but commercial status around the globe will be our final presentation. And then please stick around because we'll be keeping the networking floor open at the end of the day as well for you to continue those conversations. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to invite back up Tom, and Kathleen's up here, and Rob Neuter is our executive director, new executive director of IBI. And for those of you who didn't hear or don't know Tom, he's the executive director and chair of USBI. So the three of them are our power team and have done a lot to put together this event. And I'm going to now hand it over to them. Thank you all.
Thanks, Caroline. Welcome, bienvenidos, bienvenue, willkommen. I wish I could say that in the other 30 or 40 native languages of those that registered for the Biochar Symposium today, but I'm afraid that's a little bit beyond me at the moment. Many, many thanks to the more than 425 registrants from more than 40 countries, to our generous gold, silver, and bronze sponsors, and to those that have contributed countless hours to getting this program from concept to conference, albeit a virtual one this time around. COVID has put a hold on both the in-person IBI biochar study tours and to the USBI biochar conferences that have been gaining popularity over the past few years. Not wanting to let another year pass without a similar gathering, IBI and USBI combined forces this year to bring you the Business of Biochar Symposium using Remo, which Caroline, our tech guru and host, just showcased. This is as close as we could get to an in-person style meeting this year. The silver lining is, of course, that the carbon footprint for this type of meeting is 90% or more lower than our in-person gatherings. Nevertheless, both IBI and USBI are very much hoping that we're able to resume in-person conferences, study tours, and demonstrations next year to continue to showcase some of the phenomenal growth that has been going on within the industry despite COVID and despite the supply chain disruptions caused by this prolonged pandemic. Hopefully, many of you will agree that it is both an exciting yet oftentimes exhausting time to be involved in the business of biochar. Never before has so much interest, investment, and opportunity been focused on our industry. Never before has so much change happened so quickly. And never before have so many new people with new backgrounds, new perspectives, and new notions of how to scale the industry joined the biochar space. Keeping current on all of these changes is well nigh impossible at the individual and even at the corporate level. The topics we've chosen to discuss over the next few days are aimed at bringing you some of the latest biochar research highlights and some global commercial updates, as well as diving a bit deeper into the fast-changing carbon market industry, which is having such an incredibly positive impact on biochar production. Finally, on Thursday, we bring you perspectives from investors interested in the biochar industry, as well as biochar companies that will share some of their lessons learned from successfully raising capital from the investment community. We also put out a call for short videos to biochar companies seeking either buyers for biochar-based carbon removal credits or seeking investors to help spur growth. To be honest, we thought we'd be flooded with videos, but that was not really the case. Nevertheless, we have a few brave companies that are willing to share their corporate stories, and we'll be showcasing these on Wednesday and Thursday. One of the main reasons we solicited this type of information is that Tom and I, and no doubt others in the industry, are increasingly asked by venture capitalists, and yes, even sometimes philanthropists, about biochar companies or projects worthy of investments or funding. We do not pretend to know about all the different biochar opportunities across the globe. They're increasing so fast, it's impossible to stay on top of everything. Even when we are connected to certain companies, such as our sustaining or business members, we don't always have the latest information about whether a company is seeking funding or not at the moment. We hope to somehow document and grow this body of knowledge over the next few years, which will help biochar companies tell their own story in their own words, so that those interested investors and carbon buyers can seek them out for further conversation. I should, of course, mention that neither IBI nor USBI is recommending nor vouching for the companies that have put forth videos. The due diligence is strictly the responsibility of investors and other funders. 2021 has been a breakthrough year for IBI. We are exceedingly fortunate to have received a very generous grant this year from the WOCA Foundation, which has enabled us to put many different things in motion that we've only been able to dream about before. We've hired our first full-time executive director, Rob Neuter, whom you'll hear from shortly. We've made progress on finally updating biochar material standards, as well as beginning to gather data for a new global market survey. And we've been able to put on programs such as this. We've also seen our membership and other non-grant related revenues more than double over the last year, an excellent indication of the huge growth of interest in biochar around the world. Our plans for the coming year are to take maximum opportunity of these funds to help the entire biochar community to scale up quickly and sustainably to meet the climate challenge humans are facing. There's much work to be done, and each of us can, and I hope will, contribute and collaborate to scale as effectively and efficiently as possible. I'd like to say just a few words about the recent Conference of the Parties in Glasgow, as so many people have asked how biochar fared there. I have to say it was pretty disappointing to barely hear a peep about biochar, but believe it or not, this actually gave me some modicum of hope. Hope that once legislatures and negotiators finally begin to understand the potential of biochar to sequester carbon and reduce greenhouse gases such as methane from livestock, landfills, and old oil and gas wells, once they understand the co-benefits such as waste reduction and renewable energy, once they understand that biochar and biochar production can contribute to the achievement of at least a dozen of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and once they understand that biochar is one of only a handful of negative emissions technologies that is safe, scalable, and shovel-ready, then I think they can and will increase their climate ambitions and nationally determined contributions, which is sorely needed. For the next few days, we'd like to talk about, think about, and inspire scaling biochar production and use across the globe in a sustainable yet profitable manner. We hope all of you gain new insights and make new connections that will facilitate industry scaling and increased national ambitions. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'd like to use.
Hi, Tom. Just sorry to interrupt, but we don't see your screen yet.
Okay, well.
Just want to let you know.
How about now? Do you see it
now? There we go. Perfect.
It's coming.
Okay, scaling biochar. I'd like to use a few examples from North America to talk about the opportunities, roadblocks, and policies we face with biochar. As I indicated before, USBI is a nonprofit organization Our activities primarily focus on networking, education, and demonstration. We enjoy the support of the many organizations, especially the USDA Forest Service, which allows us to provide market and technical support to biochar producers and users in North America. We're also collaborating with organizations like the University of Nebraska to prepare guidelines for biochar use. And we collaborate closely with organizations like the USDA Agricultural Research Service, which is preparing a biochar atlas guideline decision-making tool for biochar, and also the Natural Resource Conservation Service that has recently launched a soil carbon amendment which encourages the use of biochar. So we have a lot of opportunities, and our big goal, our big opportunity for IBI, USBI, particularly in North America, is to convert the billion tons of biomass that we have available to green carbon markets, and also to sequester half of that carbon into by returning it to the soil as biochar. That would sequester approximately 600 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or about 15% of the carbon footprint in the United States. So worthy goals and worthy opportunities, but how do we get there? We know, for example, that biochars have a lot of benefits for soil, and these benefits constitute a long-term investment in soil health and climate resilience. We have technologies evolving from jet fuels to hydrogen with biochar co-products, and we've been working with a number of these technology developers. We're seeing pilot facilities go up, and while right now our industry is primarily many small producers and a few large producers, we're seeing these advanced technology systems go up that have biochar as a co-product. And that's how I got involved with biochar, and that is looking at chars as a co-product that could be used to manage nutrients and solve a lot of our other environmental issues. So what roadblocks do we have? Again, we're an emerging industry with many small-scale businesses and a few large-scale producers. Large-scale production, again, has been mostly co-products of biomass energy and wood processing, with a few plants making biochars for purpose. The limited production tends to limit supply and force high prices with limited sales. We have, for example, a drought of biochar in the Northeast. We see biochars being transported from the West Coast and the Midwest to the Northeast. Communicating the best use and benefits of biochar has been a challenge. We need more opportunities to show how biochar can enhance existing practices. We lack an industry-wide system of classifying biochars to ensure that biochar qualities are appropriate to their application so that consumers know what to expect. We lack specifications for biochar to use in markets such as green building, stormwater, or urban soil remediation, so that biochar-based products can be used in public projects. USBI will engage support from biomass businesses and industry to overcome these roadblocks. Policies. We've made some progress in the United States in policy which favor the use of biochar. For example, commercial labeling guidelines for soil amendments now allow us to list the slow release of phosphorus from biochar products. We've seen favorable policies at federal and state levels. The NRCS developed a soil carbon amendment enhancement to encourage the use of biochar, which will become a national cost share program. USBI support encouraged the California Department of Food and Agriculture Soil Health Program to include biochar in field demonstrations. USBI participates in a biochar policy task group involving representatives from 18 environmental and agricultural organizations, which has led to discussions with legislators and staffers. Biochar has been discussed in Senate and legislative hearings. For the first time, we see funding for biochar from forest residues in the infrastructure bill and proposed in other legislation such as the Build Back Better bill. We need policy development at all levels to enable the further growth of biochar. Biochar in the woods. At the request of public and private foresters, USBI, in collaboration with the Forest Service, will present a workshop on biochar in the woods in January. A day-long webinar on making and using biochar in forestry will be followed by hands-on training during 3 field days in California. We hope to present workshops to demonstrate biochar use in specific applications around the country to help overcome some of the roadblocks and take advantages of the challenges. Biochar and Bioproducts 2022. In August 2022, we'll collaborate with Eastern Biochar, West Virginia University, and the Mid-Atlantic Sustainable Biomass Consortium for Value-Added Products, or MassBio, to host Biochar and Bioproducts 2022. So please join us in Morgantown. Thank you for attending the Business of Biochar. Join us at the USBI table during the networking session. Please grow with us. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Let me welcome you to our symposium today. I'm Rob Neuter. I have the privilege of having been hired as the International Biochar Initiative's Executive Director of a little less than 3 months. Those of you who know me know that I use one of two terms to describe this experience. The first is, it's been like drinking from a fire hose. There's an awful lot coming at me and a lot to absorb, but there's never a dull moment. The second is that I feel that every day I'm running as I can to keep from falling behind. Again, we have so much to do and so many opportunities in front of us. And at the moment, a few hands to do that work. What I'd like to do in the 8 minutes or so that I have is to try to give you about 30 minutes worth of information. I'm going to try to move quickly through some slides, which will help me make some of these points without necessarily reading each one for you. I hope you will do that yourself. Caroline, could we move to the next slide? I have established 5 priorities for the next 7 months. The IBI fiscal year ends June 30th, 2021. And at the moment, horizon is about those 7 months in terms of the work that has to be done to get this organization up to speed and meeting its potential. So my 5 priorities are: number 1, to professionalize the organization. In the previous model, IBI has accomplished a great deal using its volunteer leaders and receiving services and management support from the firm TTC, which works with a number of organizations in the green energy space. And they have provided us with a lot of support, including this conference, and Caroline and Brian, who have devoted a lot of their time and attention to putting seminars on. So we thank them for that. Other than that, our volunteer leaders have devoted a great deal of time and content and their knowledge and energy to making this organization very active, making programs available to you, making information and newsletters come out regularly. And the issue that I would say we have to deal with is it's now time to engage a team of professionals to run the organization and to allow our volunteer leaders to engage in the mechanisms where they should be engaged, such as in the board, on committees, and in ad hoc interest groups. I want to personally say a word of thanks to Tom Miles and especially Kathleen Draper, because in this a little less than 3 months that I've been on board, they've been a great help to me, spent a lot of time with me and a lot of patience. And I am hoping to give them a little bit of a relief from all of that support that they've had to provide as we move forward. And again, as I say, professionalize the organization. The next priority is that we need to do a few things immediately to increase the value of your membership in IBI. We're going to undergo a website overhaul pretty soon. I have been reaching out to many of our business members and other members, especially those who have been sponsors of this symposium, to get to know each of you as well as I can. I want to hear from you. I want to know what your problems are and what are the things that you think IBI should be doing to solve those problems. We also have increased our involvement in a number of ways with respect to international development, which is kind of the perspective that I come from in my background. And we have engaged in outreach to the United States Agency for International Development, the UN Soils Coalition that is an outgrowth of the Food Systems Summit that took place in September, and outreach to multilateral development institutions in general. In addition, the plans over the next few months is to set up a system where we can better facilitate collaboration between IBI and the regional biochar organizations, such as the European Biochar Initiative and Australia, New Zealand Biochar Initiative and others. The third priority is that we need to emphasize the education and PR necessary to raise the profile and public awareness of what biochar is and what its benefits can be. This kind of outreach has to be targeted, number one, to the policymaking community. That's people in government and working with many of the NGOs and others who are active in the policy space to make sure that when alternatives where for development as well as carbon sequestration come about, that biochar is front and center as an option that's under consideration. In order to do this, we have to strategically plan our engagement. We did spend 2 weeks at COP26 in Glasgow earlier this, not this month, in the first month of weeks of November. And I think we learned a lot. We know we need to be much more engaged in the planning and the type of opportunities that we can pursue when it comes to COP27 next year, which will be held in Egypt. We have to hone our messaging so that we make an impact, and we have to do more than just talk to ourselves. We have done some strategic planning input generation from our board, and one of the strengths that someone mentioned was that we communicate very well, but only to ourselves. And so we need to talk to ourselves, but we need to talk to others as well, and we need to talk to them in a language that they understand. Next slide, please. I think it is very, very important that we preserve the IBI model of a big tent. I use this expression because there are many subsectors within the biochar community, and all of them should have a home within IBI. Many times people say with opportunities that are coming forward, it's time to focus and concentrate and only work on those that give you what you think will be the best returns. But I challenge that as the wrong approach for IBI's service to the biochar sector writ large. We have to do the work that is beneficial to our academicians and researchers. We need to work for the benefit of biochar producers, equipment manufacturers, We need to work on biochar as a tool for international development and poverty reduction. And we need to work on biochar's role as a building material, filtration and remediation material, and the exciting and emerging carbon markets that are coming forward, and the opportunity that that presents to change the economics of biochar moving forward. Next slide, please. Finally, we're going to go through a strategic planning process. The WOCA Foundation, who provided us the grant that we're currently operating under, has this as one of our primary deliverables, and I think that's a very prudent thing to do. First, I wanted to talk about strategic planning as what our objectives are, and second, I wanted to talk about them in terms of some of the process that we'll undergo. I call the main objective is to figure out what we want to be when we grow up. The purpose of our organization is manyfold, but we also have to concentrate on making sure each of the areas where we work, whether it's research, whether it's development, whether it's carbon markets, that we achieve the greatest impact we can. So that means we have to define our vision for biochar, and we have to have this organization become sustainable financially. This may entail expanding and offering more services for a fee than we have done in the past. And some of the things that we have done, and again, commend the organizations and the people who have spent so much time and effort working to provide these services on a volunteer basis. But this includes working on standards and certification for biochar, educational programs, study tours, webinars, market surveys, and many other things we either have going right now or that we could do in the future. Part of this outgrowth of what we will come up with is what is the organizational structure that enables IBI to operate and to achieve our objectives. Next slide, please. There's one thing that I wanted to go over with you in terms of the process we're going to undergo. We have already started our strategic planning by having our board members submit to me confidential input using a SWOT analysis, assessing our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and also answering several strategic questions for the future. I have been aggregating that information, and we will do work from there. The second thing is that we need to collect this kind of information from many more people. Any and all of you who are on this call or symposium should be able to, in the next several weeks or months, receive a form where you can provide us your input. We want to reach out to the biochar community that's not a member of IBI. Why aren't they members? What is it that IBI is not doing that they would like to see us do and would join in helping us get the job done if we were to be focused in the right way? Once we receive all of this input, we're going to engage in some focus group interviews, as well as try to figure out a way to get our board to spend several days together, virtually or in person, to digest the feedback and plot IBI's path for the future. So I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to state in closing that my role is to try to bring to bear all of the aspirations and hopes that you have and try to put them into practice. I think given that I do biochar community, I do bring a new perspective, which in the Zen tradition is called a beginner's mind. And a beginner's mind is not overly challenged by too much knowledge that creates impressions that can be difficult to take apart. So I'm starting with a fresh look, and I hope you can feed me the information to make good decisions. The other things we need to do is to assemble a high performance team, be available to you as our members and leaders, and to keep moving forward, keeping many balls in the air at once. And with your help and patience and involvement, I hope that by July 1, 2022, we can say we hit all 5 targets. Thank you very much. So I believe at this point, we are moving into the next session, which
that is correct. So we're going to now immediately move into our next session, which is academic progress and future research needs. So to start, I'm going to invite up all of our speakers that are in that session that are here with us. We do have some that have submitted video presentations, so we will play those. So we have Johannes Lehmann, Claudia Common, and Harnway Kua, who is, I hope, joining us. I know it's the middle of the night for some of these people, but I believe he is joining us. So if you guys will all turn on your cameras and mics, we will begin our next presentation.
And I will introduction of our speakers. Professor Claudia Common is the head of institute within the Department of Applied Ecology and Soil Fertility and Plant Nutrition at Hochschule Geisenheim University in Germany.
Yeah,
sorry to
perfect.
butcher the name. She's done incredibly large amounts of research on biochar that I could cite, but I won't. I would just point out that in looking at her background, she has recently been working on a project that I found very interesting called Understanding the Invisible: Insights into Greenhouse Gas Research. And with Dr. Johannes Lehmann, he is professor of soil biogeochemistry and soil fertility management at Cornell University. Received his graduate degree in soil science at the University of Bayreuth, Germany. Probably butchered that name too. Prior to his appointment at Cornell, he coordinated research on nutrient and carbon management in the central Amazon, where he worked with the Terra Preta soils. And in the last 10 years, he has focused on nanoscale investigations of soil organic matter. He is a co-founder of the International Biochar Initiative and a member of the editorial boards of Nutrient Cycling and Agroecosystems and Plant and Soil. And I recently, through a happenstance, found that Dr. Lehmann and I share a number of interests in the area of African art and contemporary art. So we can talk about that at the tables later. And finally, Harnway Kua is joining us from Singapore, where it is late at night. Last week, he was participating with us in another symposium or event that was held at 3 o'clock in the morning his time. So if nothing else, give him credit for being one of the stalwart participants, giving his best here. His vision is to help promote the use of biochar as a sustainable building material that reduces the carbon intensity of the building industry. He has proposed to draft a set of industry guidelines or standards on biochar building materials including feedstock selection, biochar production procedure, and biochar concrete testing protocol. In the academic domain, he helps universities start their own biochar building material research programs. So with that, we have a great set of speakers. I don't want to take any more time. I will call on Professor Claudia Kamen to start the program, followed by Johannes and then Harn Wei. So I won't get in the middle of those. If when you're done, just pass it on to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just selecting the right screen here, and I wasn't sure if Johannes would speak first. So I hope you can see my slides now. Is it visible for you? Okay, thank you, because I can't see you anymore as long as I'm looking at these slides in the presentation mode. Yeah, I didn't know if I would talk first or Johannes would talk first. So I'm starting a little bit with a slide, little bit of basics here. If you do pyrolysis, you normally get 3 products, more or less, slow pyrolysis. So you have a solid material called biochar. Usually you have a certain amount of bio oil that could be harvested, but often it's kind of burned. And you have permanent pyrogas, which is CH4COH2, which is normally or often enough it's burned, and you can harvest that way thermal heat that you can use in different ways. So you can either replace fossil fuels and use the thermal heat for house heating, or have other uses for it. If you think about sequestering carbon. So if you have a plant growing, you have an uptake of CO2 from the atmosphere. And if you put that into these products and use these products, you will have a kind of CO removal from the atmosphere. And we are not just talking about biochar in soils. I just brought something to show you. So I'm going to show it to the camera. I hope you can see it. This is a little black pot made from polyethylene and biochar for planting. And if you replace the polyethylene at some point with bio oil, you will have a complete carbon negative product that contributes to carbon sequestration. If you look at what you do on a global scale, this is a figure from a paper of Johannes, and I'm probably maybe only taking a short time because I hope he's going to show it too. So if you have a vegetation growth, you can either have it and then reach a steady state with a kind of grown up forest or something like that. Or if you harvest the biomass, you remove some of that carbon that was in the biomass and it's starting to regrow. If you put that into biochar, you have half of the carbon that was initially harvested put into solid form that's not going to decompose for centuries. And by that, you can have the additional carbon that you hold back in your soil or in your ecosystem or in some products, and the regrowth of the vegetation. And then there's the big question if the amount of soil organic carbon, which is not biochar, will increase over time or if it won't. And the properties that define the longevity of biochar is chemical properties. So you can describe it very well using the chemical H to C ratio or the O to C ratio, or as a proxy, the pyrolysis temperature. So if you have, if you have these, you can calculate how long the carbon that you fix in biochar will stay in the terrestrial biosphere if you use it in soils. Biochar has a strange relationship with a lot of nutrients, and I'm going just to show you a tiny experiment that we did at some point and published in 2015, when I first noted that biochar seems to have a kind of exchange and love for nitrogen and especially nitrate. And as we know now from other publications, if you have the biochar in a kind of acidic environment, like that you have low molecular organic acids, like what roots exude, then you have an increased property of biochar to catch nitrate. What we compared here, this is a biomass that was harvested. We had a 3-factorial study. We had control soils, which were very poor, and either we put the production fresh biochar in it, or we had a biochar that was previously co-composted. It was put into compost making and then repicked. And you can see here a composted particle and a pure one. And what you can see here is we had a study with two different factors in addition. We either put compost into the soil, which is an organic fertilizer, or in addition, either a low or a high amount of mineral fertilizer. And so you have a kind of fertilization increase from the left to the right. And what you can see is that the pure biochar often decreased the biomass growth. And it was more pronounced when nutrients were lacking. And the opposite happened with the co-composted biochar, which was full of nutrients that it took from the compost. And here you can see a growth improvement, which is in relative terms much larger when you have not so many nutrients going around. This is quite in line with what we get from meta-studies. Meta-studies are a tool to review a lot of different studies that have been done and see what the overall results are and compare them statistically. And what we did after now about 10 years of biochar research is we did a review of those global meta studies. And there were 26 that were really nice and had a proper use of methodology and so on. And so we had a lot of different things that we had a look at. So whenever you see here a bar going to the right, you have a overall positive effect on that property. And this is plant productivity, crop yield, also distinguishing if there was an additional fertilization or not. And you can see there's an overall positive effect. If you look at other parameters like root biomass, you most certainly see an increase overall in reported by these meta studies. And if you see some negativity here, then it's a kind of good negativity, because what was reduced was the nitrate leaching or the nitrous oxide emissions, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. And as an added benefit, you had absorption of heavy metals, so less of these heavy metals ended up in the biomass. Just yesterday, I got the notification of a new meta study that came out, which is also very highly recommended for reading. And just to give a very short peek into it, they also did a very good comparison distinguishing between if the control and the biochar treatments were equally fertilized. And what you can see here is the effect over time. So these bars show the yield increase, the overall yield increase that was identified, depending on if you had it only in the first year after biochar application or for a longer time. And as you can see here, there was no significant difference between these longer time durations, which was interesting, I think. And here you can see different kind of crops, so barley, legumes, maize, and so on. And what fared best with biochar was these tuber and root vegetables and vegetables. So these had profited most, and also rapeseed. The question is if we do need these large amounts of biochar, or if maybe smaller amounts can suffice. And there were a lot of studies done, 21 field studies with proper replicates in Nepal, where a low-tech approach was used to produce biochar, and where liquid nutrients were captured by biochar pits, and then it was used as a root zone fertilizer. So when you seed it, you put fertilizer in there, enriched in organic nutrients, and did the crop growth. And every bar that's here above the zero line shows a yield increase that was seen with different in crops and in different places in the Nepal region. And of course, we tried to replicate that somehow in Germany. So we did a lot of field trials too, but we didn't see that much of yield increases. What we saw is up to 70% yield increase in the marketable, I don't know what the name is in English, it's broccoli in Germany, with marketable vegetable yields. The big question is now, if we get a kind of return of investment, if we put biochar into the soil, will we get more soil organic carbon, which is not biochar? So will there be a kind of retention of the organic inputs that you have from roots and root biomass and crop residues and stuff like that? And there was an interesting longer-term study that emerged last year where 3 different cropping practices were compared, were maize and switchgrass and prairie grasses. So they had not a lot of tilling and not a lot of time of a bare soil. And this interesting thing was that the amount of carbon that was found then in 0 to 5, 5 to 15, and so on, soil depths was much higher when biochar was in play, and it was not the biochar alone. So the biochar that had been put in was about 7.25 tons per hectare, and the amount that was found after 6 years was about 14 tons per hectare, and in the no control plots, it was about 2 tons per hectare increase. So that was a really helpful thing to think about if we probably can get a kind of retention of the carbon that the plants put into the soil and improve soil properties that way, not just by the biochar itself. While finishing, I want to mention some very interesting prospects of using biochar in structured soils. That means you have 6 parts of a coarse gravel, 1 part compost and 1 part biochar in these mixtures, and you can build your normal floor onto it, and still, if you have this gravel, you have a lot of air pore space and also a lot of water holding capacity supplied by the biochar, and both allow plants to grow properly, which is a big problem in cities that are not suffering from the heat island effect. This is just how they do it in Stockholm. So this is the coarse gravel, and then there's the biochar in the compost that gets flushed into it, and then it's overbuilt, and you have these infiltration channels here that allow this below ground gravel substrate to be supplied with water. And they have an amazing growth with that. And this is just to show what it looks like. This is a normal street after the heat summer in 2018 that really damaged a lot of urban green in Scandinavia. And this is just the next street nearby, which was done with these biochar macadam substrates, which looks completely different, photographed at the same time. So this is my little march through all this kind of what I see as interesting emerging fields to use biochar as a fertilizer ingredient, not just as a pure thing to apply to improve end use efficiency, to go for material use with things like these plastics that are a kind of carbon sinks in human use, and to go for building materials. We will hear about that, and these urban tree substrates, I think they are quite interesting. So thank you very much. I put a lot of literature in here, so if somebody's interested in a little bit enhanced reading, I can just, send it along. Okay, now I need to go back and
Thank you very much, Claudia and Johannes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thanks a lot, Claudia, for teeing up this topic. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me and staging this phenomenal event. Obviously, this is hugely disappointing that we're not all in the same room and can talk to each other and see each other and forge connections. But I guess this is as good as it gets for now. Well, this is going too far. I'll talk a bit about a few high-level research and development updates, and glad for Claudia to explain biochar in principle. I want to start and tee up the climate change discussion on biochar, and one that surprised us in a paper earlier this year by one of our postdocs, Shannon Sweet, who looked at the public support for biochar in the US. So this is a public opinion poll for the US public with a representative cross-section of the population, and only the response to how likely you are to support the soil carbon storage with biochar, without biochar, if it includes biochar or not. And there was no statistically significant difference between those two answers. Now you can argue that maybe not everybody knew what biochar is. That is certainly true. But there was an explanation what it would be. And it seemed that, at least as the general public is concerned, there was no difference. There was also no difference between Republicans and Democrats in their attitude towards having biochar be part of a soil carbon sequestration strategy to mitigate climate change. So maybe there are some openings, and definitely there was a huge call for looking at climate change mitigation as well as part of this poll. I would typically like to distinguish three different entry points for looking at climate change mitigation using biochar systems. One is called A here, renewable energy, that is generated by conversion of biomass into biochar as part of the off gases that can reduce fossil fuel emissions. B is the conversion of something that decomposes quickly into something that decomposes very slowly. That, of course, has implications for the carbon dioxide emissions from decomposing residues, but it also has implications for nitrous oxides and methane. Methane is a method that has been long established in the literature, that charred material doesn't emit any methane. But for CO2 and N2O, it is not. And this is a little bit newer and still a work in progress. And then, of course, the more intriguing part is C, what happens with existing soil organic matter and emissions of non-CO2 greenhouse gases from soil that would not originate from biochar itself or the litter. And then the third one, or the second one in this category, is the effect on photosynthesis. And that is really, I think, the one that I think is most important, as I will point out. Claudia already mentioned some aspects of biochar systems here. The same paper that she mentioned earlier that came out last week, and looking at these many moving parts that can deliver emission reductions. And not only emission reductions, but also what's called CDR, carbon dioxide removal, so actual sequestration, removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And with these donuts here, you see that whatever is orange is the proportion of carbon dioxide removal, and that is very different in these different moving parts across the whole system of biochar, where we get the biomass from, which Claudia mentioned a few key points, which is a really important part of this. I won't go into this more. The conversion subsystem, where we generate energy or even sequester gases and volatiles, and then the soil subsystem, which I typically spend more time on, because I think also that is probably where it needs to work to be adopted as a system. You also see that the biggest part here in terms of CDR is in biochar persistence. So that is the part where most of the carbon dioxide removal is generated, seen by the large part, the orange part of the donut pie. So persistence of biochar, as Claudia briefly mentioned, I'll spend 3 slides on that, is delivered through the thermal treatment that generates more fused aromatic ring structures the higher the temperature goes, and time plays a role there as well. But typically, since time is important, times are typically minimized, and therefore temperature is a large part of this equation. And that makes different materials that increasingly have lower hydrogen and oxygen contents. And it turns out, and this is a graph that Claudia showed earlier on the right side, if we compare the relationship of the biochar that remains after 100 years against either material properties such as the organic to oxygen to carbon or hydrogen to carbon ratio, or the way we make biochar, chiefly pyrolysis temperature, we realize that the H to C org ratio has the best correlation coefficient, which might indicate that it's the best way of approximating biochar persistence. Of course, it requires analysis of biochar, so one might argue that for large-scale assessments and accounting procedures, for countrywide accounting or county-wide accounting or global accounting, pyrolysis temperature might be just as fine at achieving similar information on these large scales. There are opportunities to bring this into methods, and there has been an IPCC method appendix, as we need to point out, that incorporates those. That those are the national greenhouse gas accounting guidelines. The future U.S. greenhouse gas accounting guidelines will hopefully have similar methods in there, and then there are various commercial platforms that are starting to develop those, and we'll see what enters those methods. But it looks as if these will be also moving towards H to C org properties. What I would now like to pivot to is thinking about the effects of biochar on soils. And not only because I'm a soil scientist, but probably that's a known bias of mine, but because I think that is maybe the chief incentive for a land user to add biochar to soil, a farmer to support the core business of whatever the farm is producing, and we can look at some of the trade-offs between adding carbon to soil and accruing carbon in soil, and crop yields for instance biochar versus some other cropland management, versus, for instance, land use changes for restoring wetlands. While restoring wetlands has a large potential in soil carbon accrual, akin to, although it's done on a very spatially small scale, akin to global projections and potentials for biochar and cropland management, we can assume that at its extreme, restoring wetlands to natural wetlands will eliminate agriculture, and only at a incipient spot, but potentially a very intriguing one, might increase crop yields in a transition from agriculture to wetland restoration. One might argue that cropland management might decrease in its extremes as well, crop yield, because either the organic matter is used for adding it as residue to soil or is exported as crop. So that might pose a trade-off there as well. When looking at the fertilizer crop yield effects on the x-axis versus the biochar crop yield effect on the y-axis, one might expect some kind of a correlation, or either a positive correlation, because biochar might do the same thing that fertilizers might do. That would indicate would be indicated by a positive correlation, or because it does something complementary where biochar increases crop yield most, where fertilizer doesn't. What you see here is more or less a smattering of dots across the landscape from this global meta-analysis, and there's no discernible, easily discernible effect soil type or by fertilizer effect, which means two things. One thing, it means that there are opportunities with biochar to increase crop yields where fertilizers are not performing well, but that doesn't come as a rule. We cannot always assume that biochar addresses crop growth constraints that cannot be addressed by fertilizers. So it's a very nuanced discussion, as one might expect from just first principles of knowing soils. The other big point that I would like to make, that it's not always clear that greenhouse gas emission reductions and carbon dioxide removal are linked and joined at the hip. One might expect with more carbon dioxide removal that there's also more systems greenhouse gas emissions, and in general that can be expected. But there are also trade-offs. Case in point is wetland restoration, where with more carbon in soil, you might also generate more nitrous oxide and methane that then generate lower systems greenhouse gas emissions than carbon dioxide removal alone might suggest. And for biochar systems in general, they seem to be lying on a global, for the global potential above the 1-to-1 line because of its potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through fossil fuel energy offsets. But of course, you don't have to have that, because you could imagine that you are not even producing any energy offsets. And so it is possible that we can, with inappropriately designed biochar systems, generate more emissions that would compensate for the carbon dioxide removal, which is of course undesired and is indicated here with this red area. The two arrows that go to the upper right are the negative priming or less carbon mineralized and greater plant growth. So those are the approaches where the effects of biochar that I think we should pay a lot of attention to, as they would generate both greater carbon dioxide removal while reducing also greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where we have the greatest synergies. What about the variability and amounts? Greenhouse gas emission reductions indicated here in orange across the three broad areas of where does the biomass come from, how is it converted, and what's produced, and what happens once we apply it to soil. And you see that most of the bars are on the greenhouse gas emission reductions, that there are only 3 areas where actual CDR is delivered, and that's through plant growth, increased plant growth, or reduced. The difference between decomposition of biomass and biochar in the middle, and then on the right side, negative priming. And I would say that those are maybe the ones we want to think about the hardest. We also see that we think that, or the authors here, amongst Claudia and many other colleagues, would propose that the variability is the lowest at the moment that we know of at the conversion, and the highest on the right with application, but also CO2 uptake by plants. We have quite a bit of variability and uncertainty. I'm coming to the
Johannes,
last. Yeah.
I just asked if we could move quickly. We're a little behind schedule. Thank you.
Yes. Accounting approaches, I think, are showing also a trade-off between accuracy, amounts, and quantifiability. And one might argue that there's a sweet spot in the middle, where not just accounting for biochar, CDR, but also for some of the greenhouse gas emission reductions is most promising. And that is something one needs to figure out. The last slide, our highest recommendation priorities for CO2 removal, CDR, is looking at biomass assessment and especially crop responses for greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide from soil, and adoption markets and crop yield. That might be most important to look at in the short term. And with that, I'll thank you very much and look forward to it.
Thank you so much. Excellent presentation. Arnwai, are you ready to provide your comments, please? Well,
I think that it might just take a little bit of time for his video to come on, even if he's pushed the buttons. Should we maybe just do Stephen Joseph's video, and then maybe by the end of that, we'll hope that his videos come on?
okay, we will. I failed to mention at the beginning that we will do a video from Dr. Stephen Joseph, who is quite well known to many of you, and a professor. I don't have his bio in front of me, but he has done a lot of work, many aspects of biochar, and he is from Australia. And so we will queue up that video and we'll come back to Harnwai after that. Thank you.
All right, Rob, if you want to come back up, go ahead. And I have been working with Harnwai, and he's been trying to get on. Oh, we have a screen. I don't see him. We are doing our best here with the technical difficulties. Maybe we'll just wait a moment. And if we can't get it to work, we should just move on to Q&A. And perhaps have a webinar later. Because
hear me?
I think we're getting it.
I think I see sign of life. Okay.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining.
Right. Okay. All right. Can you hear me now?
The floor, yes, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To be here, it's always a good thing for me to be part of BI, and I'm very honored to be able to speak to all of you here. You know, together with some of the people I really admire in the field of biochar. So my name is Han-Wei Kwa. I'm from the National University of Singapore, the Department of the Built Environment. So for the past few years, my work has been on customizing biochar as different kinds of building materials or construction materials. So today, I'm going to focus on how we have progressed so far for the past 10, 11 years, and of course, provide my own interpretation of what the future will look like for biochar. So I'm going to do that by using this. So the paper on biochar concrete was actually published in 2012. So that's not too long ago. It wasn't by me. It was by a group of researchers, scholars from South Korea. And that paper was on how biochar can contribute by enhancing the compressive strength of concrete. So for a few years after that, what I observed is, I would say, a heightened level of global activities, research activities on biochar concrete, focusing on explaining why there's this enhancement in compressive strength. So you can actually read about how biochar enhances micro, and of course make use of its hygromechanical properties in order to bring
Harn,
some
we're,
yes.
Excuse me, we're still seeing your first slide. So
Okay. So
if you could advance it.
I can probably tell Harn what helps
right,
because I had the same problem yesterday. If you Harn, if you share your entire screen, so select
yes.
a whole screen and then you move to your own presentation, then we will see the entire presentation and not just the first slide. That was my problem yesterday as well. So we
there we go. Much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Will
no,
that be
it's still
better?
not in the presentation. It's still not in the presentation mode.
Okay.
And then we wouldn't see if you click the next slide. So if you just could share your entire screen, it would be helpful. So select your monitor or.
I try not to go there. I'm not so sure about which button to. But would it just go through my slides this way?
Yeah, just go through that right now since we are having the technical difficulties with you. Just we are seeing like the editing screen, so make sure to advance, in the editing screen. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll do that. So yeah. What happened after that was okay. I'm just going to delete it. All right. And starting from the year 2017, right, we began to see effort on the use of biochar to absorb and therefore to remove different kinds of air pollutants, including PMs and VOC, as in volatile organic compounds. So I've also contributed some work in this area, and this pretty much brings biochar into the mainstream of building materials when it comes to enhancement of IAQ, or indoor air quality. 1 year later, in 2018, together with a group of international researchers, I've also started a new subfield of biochar construction materials, and that is the use of biochar in construction materials applied under extreme conditions. So I call it extreme BC. And one of the first work that we came out with was the use of biochar to enhance the self-healing capability of biochar, of concrete containing biochar. And the way we did it is to make use of biochar to enhance the microbial activity. So an idea which I borrowed from all of you, I mean from our soil scientists, and apply that into a concrete. And of course, going further down towards the right, currently I find that there is an increasing amount of attention internationally to make use of biochar, a way of enhancing the sustainability of the economy in a form of course, circular economy. So I've published this here. And one of the ways of doing that is, as shown here in the blue block, is apply biochar with other concrete additives in order to green concrete, and then to make use of that as a way of achieving circularity in the economy. So this is what I've seen for the past 10 over years about the general direction of biochar in building industry, in construction materials. So how about the future? So on top here, there are two brown blocks, and these are what I foresee the future for this research. And the first one is to make use of biochar or biochar concrete as a way of enhancing carbonation by concrete, which is a way of removing or sequestering carbon dioxide. And it is a way of accelerating that carbonation process. And the second area, which is something that is not really very much worked on so far, which is something that I'll talk a little bit about today, and that is to make use of high temperature biochar to enhance certain properties in concrete. And that property is known as electromagnetic shielding effectiveness. And I know friends from New Zealand and Australia, to whom I've spoken, express a strong interest in the use of biochar to enhance the printability of concrete, to be used in concrete 3D printing. So this is one area which I foresee will have quite a bit of growth in the next few years. And on the side on sustainability assessment, all right, we can expect to see more LCA, life cycle assessment on biochar used in construction materials in next year and beyond. All right, and of course, more work on circular economy. So at this point, I would like to share a little bit on what are exploring the use of biochar as a way to sequester carbon and then apply the biochar in concrete. So this come out with in this paper, which I published a few years ago. And I would like to draw your attention to these two sets of graphs below. All right, on the left-hand side, this bar chart shows, well, the coefficient of water absorptivity. So basically, what it means is that the taller the bar, the less desirable it is. Because the taller the bar, it means that the more water is being absorbed into the center. So as you can see, we have a tiny little guy here, and that represents concrete containing biochar that is not dosed with CO2. When you dose the biochar with CO2, you find that the bars become a little bit higher. Here on the right hand, whereas the taller the bar means the stronger the sample. Same story, when we have biochar that is not dosed with CO2 in concrete, you find that you have the strongest center. So strongest combination. So the moral of the story seems to be that, well, we can definitely make use of biochar as a CO2, a sequester, and then apply the biochar in concrete, but we shouldn't overdo it. So that is something that I find really interesting because it really challenges us to look at the microstructure of biochar and how the microstructure of the mortar or the concrete will change when the biochar contains CO2. So I would like to now draw your attention to one particular topic which I've talked about just now, and that is to make use of high temperature biochar, a special kind of biochar to enhance electromagnetic shielding ability of concrete. Why do we even need this in the first place? Well, oftentimes we neglect environmental challenges and problems caused by stray EM waves, resulting in, for example, interference on sensitive medical equipment in a hospital and even medical implants. All right. So actually, people have done quite a bit of studies on or electromagnetic interference, shielding, effectiveness of different kinds of. They have done so for concrete and gypsum as well, common building materials, but they find that the level of shielding wasn't that impressive. So we set off doing this, in which make use of high temperature concrete and then high temperature biochar, put them into concrete. And on the left-hand side here, you can see that we are able to change the color, right? We can change the color of these gypsum cement by putting in different kinds of pigment without the effectiveness of these samples. So we make use of a standard setup. All right, and this is what we found. Very interesting. All right, two sets of graphs here. Once again, I would like to attention to the one on the left. So you see many clusters of bars over here. So I would like on just the first 3 clusters. In every cluster, you see 3 colors, right? Green, yellow, and blue. So the green, the height of the green bar tells us how effective that sample is in shielding the incoming EM wave, which is in the region of 2, all right, to 3.9 gigahertz, which is the Wi-Fi range of 5G, all right? So all the bars in the first graph contains a amount of biochar. Well, what is high? This is something that we are going to publish soon. So we are just going to keep that to ourselves for now. But a low amount of Fe3+. And this is what we found. Whenever we have a high amount of biochar, all right, you find that heights of these 3 green bars are almost the same. So what does that mean? Well, the first green bar represent the shielding effectiveness after just 1 day. The second bar after 2 weeks, and the third after 1 month. So basically what we found is that whenever we put a large amount of biochar into the sample, we are able to stabilize the shielding effectiveness of the tiles with time. And the converse is also true. If we are going to take away the biochar in the mixture, we find that as time goes by, the green bar will become shorter and shorter. So having biochar does have that desirable effect. But what happens if we are going to partner the high dosage of biochar with a high dosage of Fe3+? Well, we see an even more desirable effect. Compare the green bars on the left to those on the right, you will find that those on the right are a little bit higher, maybe by 5 to 8%. And what that means is that by adding Fe3+, we are able to improve the magnetic permittivity of the samples, and therefore that contributes towards increasing the EMI shielding effectiveness of the tile as well. So in conclusion, what we found is that research on biochar-based construction materials is on the rise. It's gaining traction and momentum, and most importantly, we find that it has begun to span across an increasingly widening spectrum of areas and topics. However, sustainability impacts of biochar-based construction materials on the society and economy, I feel that this is one area that really requires more research and more attention. Last and definitely not the least, what I found is that the very fact that biochar-based construction material is such a young field, it will be a good thing for us and for the field if we can strongly encourage the cross-fertilization of knowledge, meaning that we adopt knowledge in one field, for example, soil science, and apply that to concrete technology and concrete science. And that, I believe, will push us to an even higher level of academic creativity and even commercial relevance and viability. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you. Sorry for the hiccups, and I hope that you're still with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Harnwai. We have had such a full program that we have expended the time that was originally planned for question and answer. There are some excellent questions that have been submitted and voted upon, and we will do our best to get answers for you to these questions. But at this point, we're going to move to a networking break, and I think I have to call on Kathleen or Caroline to describe how we do this.
That would be Caroline.
So, yes, and thank you to our speakers who have been in our previous sessions. Just like Rob said, we have a lot of questions. We might have to answer some of those offline, especially some more general questions. which we will do we'll send that out with the recordings. Right now, we're going to move to our networking break. So that's going to be back on the floor. Just as a reminder, you double click on a table if you want to go to that table. On the left-hand side, you'll see the floors if you want to change floors. If you want to interact with our sponsors, you will find them on the first floor at their tables. Their tables are yellow and on the left-hand side. And just make sure to turn on your cameras and mics and make the most of your networking time. This is the best time to make connections. So thank you all. We will see you back here
Caroline,
at 30 for the presentation. Yeah,
Caroline. Yeah, one quick sec. I would ask people, because we have so many people here, to really try to keep your questions relevant to the presentations. We've had a lot that really don't pertain to this presentation. And so even though they're upvoted, we're in the future, in the next couple of days, we're really going to try to keep the questions relevant to what we're talking about today. If you do have other questions, I would suggest that you send them directly to IBI and we'll do our best to answer them. So thanks.
Yes, and thank you, Kathleen, for that. And just as a reminder for everyone, info@biochar-international.org is the information account for IBI. So direct general questions there. All right, we will be back at 1:30. Please continue to chat me directly if you have any technical difficulties. I'll be able to help you during the networking period here as well. Thanks, everyone.